Hello and welcome to Jenkins X, The Future Is Now. I'm Mike Vizard, your host for today's session. We are joined today by two fabulous guests from the land of CloudBees. They are both rock stars. Victor Farsick is Principal Software Strategist and Ethan Jones is the Director of Product Management. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Let's start with our first question, which is pretty simple. Victor, what exactly is Jenkins X and why do we need it?
That's complicated to answer in a single sentence. So there are a couple of versions of Jenkins X, and what it is not in the latest iteration, it's not Jenkins really. It's a completely rewritten solution for continuous delivery, and it is basically redesign of everything. It is made to be Kubernetes native, to scale, to do all the good things that we expect from continuous delivery. And that does not mean that all the Jenkins does not do those good things, but rather that Jenkins X, we really wanted to start from scratch and make it as if we would like it to be today. And the situation changed a lot, and it's quite different, the solution as well.
Great.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that real quick. One way to think about it is kind of Jenkins does all of these things so well in the CICD space and always has and will continue. We're still heavily invested in it. But one question we want to ask for the next generation of apps powered by Kubernetes and sort of cloud native architecture is what can CICD be if we start it now rather than bolting things on to things that existed before? What are modern patterns and practices that CICD can enable? So Jenkins X is really meant to be CICD if you were building it from the ground up for today's world.
All right, great. Let's take a step back for half a second and say, okay, what exactly makes microservices and containers so hard that people are trying to build out there? What's fundamentally different about the way that we're approaching this new class of application versus what we may have historically done? Victor, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that microservices are hard, but rather that the problems we are facing with microservices are different than problems we were facing with different architectural style in the past. And so those differences are really what makes it hard, simply because I think that we as industry are not yet used to solve problems in that way. And so how we are usually approaching microservices is by putting things outside of our applications. So now instead of adding frameworks to your Java code and things like that, everything is happening outside on a Kubernetes level or networking level and so on and so forth. And I think that the major challenge and what makes it really hard is lack of sufficient number of years of expertise. And I think that that's also partly what we are trying to solve by making things much more opinionated than what we are used to, I believe.
So to that degree then, gentlemen, maybe we'll throw this one at Ethan. Is Kubernetes becoming the de facto standard around which the community is going to develop, and that's where the level of expertise is going to be focused, and that's maybe where the critical mass comes together that Victor pointed out that we need?
Yeah, I think there was an open question for quite some time, but I think that question is pretty much getting answered, and I think most of the industry is seeing Kubernetes become that de facto standard. I think that is also worth acknowledging that doesn't mean everything you do as a company is going to be on Kubernetes overnight, even if your new stuff is. One of the things to that previous question that is also so tough about adopting these things is just all of your existing stuff is still there. We're trying to take on this whole new world, new tools, adapt to what you're going to do in the future while you have to keep the lights running, everything you're already doing. That's one of the major challenges. And even as we're excited about the future of Kubernetes, we also have to pay attention that teams need migration paths, they need maturity, they need support, they need companies like CloudBees that can help them on that journey specifically.
All right. Victor, a lot of people think Kubernetes is hard. What is the relationship
Indeed.
between Jenkins X and Kubernetes, and how can all these things kind of come together in some more natural motion?
So first, let me correct you. It's not that people think Kubernetes is hard. Kubernetes is hard. That's a fact. I believe that that the industry in general, community is working on making it easier, but it is very hard. And it is moving very fast as well. So I think that the major challenge with Kubernetes is first to learn it, and second to keep up with all the advancements that are happening over there, right? You can easily have a full-time job just to keep up with all the releases of Kubernetes that it makes, right? So that's a really complicated situation, I believe. Now, what we are trying to do with Jenkins X, among other things, is to make those problems in a way transparent. Now, certainly there is always going to be a person or number of people who go deep into those things, but we are assuming that not everybody in a company will spend months or years trying to figure out Kubernetes and the whole ecosystem, you know. It's simply not going to happen. So we're really, I believe, trying to make things simple, maybe, and to reduce that add maybe additional layer on top of all that complexity that would reduce it and make it kind of more intuitive, maybe.
Ethan, who do you think is going to be in charge of spinning up Kubernetes? Is it going to be the classic IT operations teams, or do you think more the developers are going to take charge of that? And I ask the question because some people will joke that, you know, Kubernetes is a platform written by engineers for engineers, and it's not really designed for the classic IT administrator. So do we need to have a different motion altogether here?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And I see we have a question in the chat, not completely dissimilar. So maybe for everyone listening, we will address any questions in the chat. So feel free to drop them in there. As far as who's going to spin up Kubernetes, I think long-term, fewer and fewer people are going to spin it up. I think that underlying Kubernetes layer is going to become an increasingly solved problem at the cloud level. Tools like Jenkins X, we really want to get you out of the weeds of Kubernetes and focus you on the job of writing code and working on your pipelines and your apps. So I think we want to, sorry about that. I think we really want to see developers working day-to-day, developers building their apps. Kubernetes should become an available resource. Tools like Jenkins X take things it can do, let you work day-to-day with it, but you don't have to go to the well of building, running, maintaining Kubernetes every time you accomplish something.
All right, and that's the siren that goes off every time you have a Kubernetes provisioning problem. But Victor.
You know, if I may add something, I think that
Sure.
many people misunderstood, thinking that the idea behind Kubernetes is for people to use it as a platform. And I believe that that's not really true. I believe that the design of Kubernetes was always meant to be a platform to build platforms, right? And I think that now we, as a community as a whole, are in that phase that we are all building platforms that people are finally going to use. Kubernetes was not meant to be used by masses directly. That's not part of the design. And I think that's where people are really getting confused. That's why it's so complex, because it's not supposed to be used directly.
It's supposed to be it needs an abstraction layer above it, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is always to build platforms on top of it that would be more specific, more higher level, and more intuitive and things like that. It's built to be built upon.
Do you think there's enough appreciation, Ethan, about how Kubernetes itself gets updated, right? It seems like there's a new release every quarter. Sometimes it's big features, sometimes it's small. Will Jenkins X kind of hide those updates on a rolling basis from me as the organization, and we'll be able to just absorb that more easily? Or am I going to be in this constant scenario where I'm going to be 2 or 3 revs behind no matter what I do?
Yeah, I think a big goal of ours is to make Kubernetes boring. So you can really focus on what your team needs to do. Kubernetes provides a lot of capabilities, like Victor was saying, for people to scaffold functionality and scaffold other things you actually want to accomplish. Kubernetes should really not be the thing your team is thinking about. And if we do that well, it shouldn't be a thing you have to worry about. So if you're talking about upgrades and managing it and things like that, that's overhead. That has nothing to do with what a team is trying to accomplish day to day. And we'd like Jenkins X to be part of the problem of moving that to a layer that's just not in most of your team's brain.
All right. Hey, Victor, can you describe a little bit? Let's jump right back to Jenkins X for a while and focus there. What exactly is the relationship between Jenkins X and Jenkins itself? I mean, are they father and son, brother and sister? What's the relationship here between these two things going forward?
I mean, the current latest release of Jenkins X, if you compare it with Jenkins, I think that the only relation is that both bear the same name. There is no really Jenkins in the latest iteration of Jenkins X. It's a complete rewrite, right? It uses different tech like Tecton and Scaffold and Canico and Prao and a bunch of other things. But there is no direct relation. I would say that the main relation is that based on experience gathered over many years of using Jenkins and doing CD and Kubernetes and so on and so forth, that's the result. So you can think of it maybe like a son or a daughter of Jenkins that shares its DNA but does not really look alike.
All right, so if Jenkins X is a child of Jenkins, then is it more opinionated? What am I actually trading off here in terms of the experience?
I think that in many aspects, Jenkins X goes in a completely opposite direction than Jenkins. Like, for example, Jenkins is completely unopinionated. You can do whatever you want. You have a blank slate that says, go, write your pipeline, reinvent the wheel, do the same thing after 3 months that everybody else did it already. And on the other side of the spectrum is Jenkins X that says, no, we are very opinionated. This is the industry standard of how you do certain type of processes for certain type of applications and frameworks and so on and so forth. And there are many other similar examples where actually they're quite opposite. There are, of course, places where they meet, but as I said before, I think that Ethan mentioned kind of, if we would start over, how we would design the system based on the same experience, and that's Jenkins X. And it just happens to be opposite in some aspects and similar in others.
I think one way to think about that relationship between Jenkins and Jenkins X, and there's kind of two threads. There's, will Jenkins X do the things I'm doing on Jenkins today? Can I move my Jenkins pipelines over to Jenkins X? And we took one attempt at that earlier in the community by running Jenkins masters with Jenkins X, and we've deprecated that experiment right now, but I think that is a problem we will revisit because we do know that there needs to be some kind of way to get across from Jenkins to Jenkins X for applications where that makes sense. So I think what that line is for the community is something we're still working on, how we cross that bridge for people. As far as the actual one-to-one relationship, I like to think of Jenkins X as kind of a spiritual successor to Jenkins. So what made Jenkins great, right? It's community-driven, it's extensible, it's open source. We want to apply all those same principles, all the things that help Jenkins thrive and adapt for years. We want to apply all those to Jenkins X, but that doesn't mean we're necessarily going to take any direct concept from Jenkins and rebuild it specifically for Jenkins X.
When you guys first started building Jenkins, it was whole cloth. There wasn't much to work with, but with Jenkins X, we're a little bit further down the path. Do you think that the relationship between CloudBees and the community is going to be different around Jenkins X than it is in Jenkins, or will it be the exact same? Ethan, you want to start there?
Yeah, my hope is it'll be even better. We're building Jenkins X from the beginning in public as CloudBees. It's open source from day one. I think we've learned a lot from Jenkins over the years, but what we're not doing with Jenkins X is coming in as a company and trying to commercialize something that's already got open source traction. We're trying to build this hand in hand with the community from day one. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to establish some new habits right out of the gate.
What are you guys doing, Ethan, just to follow up on that, to make it easier for the average enterprise to maybe consume Jenkins X more so than maybe we've seen in the past? Is there some way that they're going to be brought into this conversation in a more structured way?
Yeah, so as of this month, we have a thing out there called CloudBees Jenkins X Distribution, which is a package of Jenkins X that is a subset of features that are at a GA level, thoroughly tested, and you can buy a CloudBees support package around that. So the Jenkins X distribution, which is going to update on a very stable monthly cadence, will be promised full end-to-end docs and testing for everything. This is meant to help companies adopt Jenkins X in a more safer and highly secure way, because we know the open source world can be a little bit scary. It can move very fast, it experiments fast. We don't want to shut down how excited and energetic the community there is around innovating. So we've released the distribution specifically so companies who want to dip their toes in but need a little bit more stability and need to know, hey, which of these features are 100% ready for prime time and which ones are just cool ideas the community is exploring. We're trying to make that very easy for companies in the distribution. And then we're listening. So any company that wants to talk or ask any questions or hear more, we know this is relatively early days, so our ears are open and we're happy to sit down and talk to and learn from anyone.
All right. And there also seems to be this parallel effort called the Continuous Delivery Foundation, I think, or CDF. What's the relationship, Ethan, between what you guys are trying to do, what CDF will do, and what the community will do, and how will all that come together?
Yeah, I think the foundation is really important to us. We strongly believe that open source standards are good for developers and good for the whole world. We want CloudBees to succeed and be part of that story, but we don't think giant proprietary solutions are the right way forward for the industry. So as this next generation of tools like Jenkins X, which uses Tecton, which is another project, as this next generation of tools emerge, we want to make sure that these standards develop well, that we know how to separate the proprietary bits from the interoperational base layer bits, and that everything we're doing is in service of actually accelerating cloud native application development and making it easier for anyone coming from any place to do that. So that's really the foundation's charge, is how do we build a community to really push the whole industry forward with these next gen projects, and how can we all work together to do that?
Hey, Victor, within the conversation about that, there's a lot of focus on these things called Tecton pipelines. Can you explain what those are and how maybe they're different from what we've seen in pipelines in the past?
So it's a project, open source project started by Google, and I think that the goal of the project is to add very low-level CICD capabilities to Kubernetes. I insist on low level because you're not supposed to use it directly, but rather the idea behind the project is to provide that capability and standardize those things, again, on a low level in Kubernetes. And we are very much focused on trying to predict the future in a way. What is going to be the standard in Kubernetes? What is or what will be? And then build on top of it, right? And then I think that Tecton is probably, in a way, engine behind Jenkins X, and then everything we build on top of it is aimed at simplifying its usage. Now, why Tecton is important is because Kubernetes at the moment, so let's say core Kubernetes does not really have capabilities or types of resources that allow us to run CI/CD processes, and then we hope it's going to become that type of standard. That's why we are so much investing in it.
All right. Let's jump to a couple of questions that are coming in from the audience just to mix this up a bit. But somebody wants to know what your ETA is for maybe AWS, and I'm curious, all the other public clouds for that matter, what is going to be the delivery mechanism for this stuff and when? And Ethan, you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, so that goes back to what I was mentioning just a bit ago about the cloud-based Jenkins X distribution, where we're trying to do some things in a very mature enterprise-ready way. So we are working on AWS support, starting with the Jenkins X distribution. I hesitate to give very tight roadmaps and dates, but we're currently targeting sometime in September to be able to say we support AWS EKS. That may come a little earlier, it may come a little bit later, but it is a high priority for us. And then once that's done, we've already got GKE out the door now. So once AWS is out the door, we'll turn around and start working on the next cloud.
All right. And as you start to think that through, I mean, we're talking about the cloud, but other attendees here are interested in the on-premise side of that. Do you think that Jenkins X plus Kubernetes is going to change the way we think about hybrid clouds and how all that comes together? And what will be the relationship between an on-premise instance and a cloud instance? And I don't know, Victor, you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, I think that in a not so far future, people will not be able to tell actually whether it's cloud or it's public or private or on-prem. In a way, I see Kubernetes in a way as new operating system for a cluster. That's what you see as a user. For you, there is Kubernetes API. What is below that API is going to be as irrelevant for most people as kernel version in your Linux distribution, whichever you choose, right? So it will be it will become irrelevant for 99% of people, I think, whether it's here or there.
Ethan, you agree with that?
I do. And if you look at most of the major cloud providers, right, they themselves are working on ways to blur that distinction between using the cloud versus using your own data center with cloud abstraction in it. The CloudBees Jenkins X distribution in Jenkins X is built to be what you might have traditionally called on-prem software. So anything you want to do with it, you can do it on-prem, you can do it in the cloud. Maybe one day you can do it with a hosted version, but I think that's going to become less of the kind of hard barrier it used to be going forward, just like Victor said.
All right. And Ethan, just to follow up on that, do you think ultimately then there'll be kind of one common control plane for all of these instances of Jenkins X and Kubernetes that are running across all these different platforms, and that's kind of part of the disappearing of the lines, or the cloud itself starts to dissipate because we are seeing everything in kind of one holistic fashion?
Yeah, I think that'll happen at least for some segments of the market. We're very cognizant, right? At CloudBees, we do a lot of work with pretty major companies and banks and government and things like that. So we do understand that there's some very complex segments of the market out there where the future will arrive more slowly or more carefully, and we need Jenkins X to serve all people, not just people in this kind of utopian end state for software. But I do think what you're going to see is piece by piece, the market does erase some of those boundaries for a wider swath of the market. And Jenkins X will be part of that, but it will also be a solution for people that are in more complicated markets.
All right. Victor, you've worked with some people and they've kind of at least tested Jenkins X, if not implemented it. What do you think will be the major challenges organizations will face? Will they be more technical? Will they be more cultural? Or what are some of the issues that they should be looking out for?
I think that the issues, and this is not only Jenkins X, it's in general, it's always cultural. Technical, that can be solved easily. You have a problem, you solve it, you fix it, you make a pull request. I'm never worried about technical. Of course, it requires a lot of work and all those things, but that's almost never a real problem, especially with bigger enterprises. It's more like getting used to the new process, to the new idea, and Jenkins X and Kubernetes as well, and many other tools are really radically different. And then what companies are struggling with is how they think that very often they're trying to put, one thing in an existing box and then doesn't fit. So it is cultural, without a doubt, at least from my point of view.
Ethan, you want to follow up on that a bit?
No, I think the technical stuff can maybe be a little bit harder for some people, definitely organizations that are trying to learn new habits while keeping mature things running. But even that, I think you could look through as a cultural angle at the end of the day. It's just the conflict of doing new stuff while doing the stuff you need to keep doing.
Ethan, do you think people will be deploying Jenkins X and Jenkins side by side, or will they pick one versus the other? And when will I decide maybe which way do I want to go with one or the other?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think they will absolutely be used side by side, and they should be used side by side. For Jenkins X to do what we need it to do, which is serve this next generation of apps, it can't do everything Jenkins X does for every app that's out there today. We have to be able to focus on what certain types of apps going forward are going to be doing. So if you've got things running in Jenkins today, we're not necessarily going to try and replace those. And CloudBees is still heavily invested in Jenkins itself in the future to keep those running. If you're using, let's say, Jenkins and Kubernetes, it may be worth a little bit of a look for you. Maybe that solution is working fine for you. But one of the things we learned through the process of modernizing Jenkins for Kubernetes is, in some cases, it would have been really nice to just start over. So that's also why we spun this up. So there is a subset of Jenkins and Kubernetes apps that probably do make more sense on Jenkins X in the future. For any app that your teams are starting ground up, you know it's going to deploy on Kubernetes, you know you're building it with containers and microservices, all that kind of good greenfield stuff. Jenkins X is probably the right day one choice for those apps rather than Jenkins. But for everything you've got on Jenkins, or for any apps that maybe aren't going to be deployed that way for the foreseeable future, Jenkins isn't going anywhere. We're not done investing in it.
Ethan, to follow that up, how do you position Jenkins X to the business leaders, right? I mean, there's always a technology conversation that goes, you know, we think it's the coolest thing in the world and we think we ought to be using this. But at the end of the day, somebody has to kind of sign off at this and approve it. So how do you get the senior leaders of a company to appreciate the need for Jenkins X, especially if they already have a CI/CD platform?
Yeah, so I think generally adopting Kubernetes is inviting a lot of conversations in companies. So we're seeing companies use that as a great moment in general to revisit what tools you use, what habits you use. You also see a lot of pain as companies struggle with our first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 attempts to adopt Kubernetes tooling and workflows went a little bit sideways. I think where Jenkins makes a lot of sense for people at the top, Jenkins X specifically, is Jenkins. Jenkins X has been there for a very long time, or Jenkins has been there for a very long time, right? It's mature, it's trusted. Most of these companies know CloudBees. They know they can count on us for enterprise needs. They know we're good at supporting open source software in the way enterprises need. And so Jenkins X is from the same people, right? We're using the same community, the same approaches. So for companies that Jenkins has served them well for so long, but maybe they're looking at what is going to get us to the future, Jenkins X carries all of the same trust and promise that you've always relied on CloudBees and Jenkins for.
Victor, can we circle back to hybrid for a minute? Do you think that the CI/CD world then is becoming a lot more federated if I'm going to use both these platforms side by side? How do I kind of manage that? Will there be one set of pipelines for both, or will everything always be kind of isolated from each other? Or how do I what can I share?
And that's a difficult question that is hard to answer in such generic terms, because, you know, so part of the question was, will they live side by side? And that's definitely yes, because in software industry, nothing ever dies. You know, things stay forever, and then new things are added on top of it. And as Ethan mentioned, Jenkins X is mostly trying to solve the need for new types of applications, new designs, new architectures and stuff like that. And that will, of course, live side by side by non-Kubernetes systems, which on the other, I don't know, virtual machines. I mean, we still have COBOL running on mainframes, right? And all those things have to work side by side. But what I don't believe is that, you know, we can find a single system, single pipeline type, or single anything that will work across everything in the industry. That just, I think that always produces suboptimal results. You know, you try to make something work in every single situation you can imagine, and then as a result, it's simply bad at all of them. Jenkins X tries to solve a very specific problem, and that problem is how to work effectively inside of Kubernetes. Everything else, at least for now, it is in realm of other solutions.
Hey, Ethan, I think it would be fair to say that DevOps has been adopted unevenly inside organizations. There are best practices, different groups doing different things in different ways. do you think that as we get down the path here with Jenkins X and Kubernetes that we might be able to accelerate the adoption of best practices deeper inside of organizations, and we might see some advances at a more rapid rate than we have? I mean, when you think about it, we've been kind of working on DevOps now for the better part of a decade, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. I saw there was a question in there. Somebody said, is anyone using Jenkins X for real? The answer to that is yes. And one of the things we hear from a bunch of people that have adopted it early on is they're actually way ahead of schedule in terms of where they thought they would be at this point, getting teams to adopt some of these modern practices and getting teams excited about things like config as code pipelines and GitOps and building these types of apps. Because Jenkins X has abstracted so much and made so many of these habits easy to adopt and so many of these things easy to see value in, it's absolutely accelerating the timelines for companies being able to push forward. So we hope every company Jenkins X lands in ends up way ahead of schedule for that transformation because it's making so much of it easier.
All right. Victor, how much can you get into some of the more technical details? One of our attendees is looking for some real deep dive. How far can you go before you lose everybody with a quicker description of just what can you tell people about Jenkins X that will make them go, oh, wow, I get this. This is awesome, and it's not just, magic.
In the time we have, I can go in a very high level. I don't think that I can show deep dive, at least in practical terms. I mean, come to San Francisco. There will be as deep as you can get next week. So it would be hard, I believe, now to go deep dive. But if there is a specific question, then I can definitely do my best to answer or demonstrate.
I'm pretty excited to see how many people here are asking for a demo. So it's probably on us to get back to everyone who attended today with some time where they can pipe in and watch a really dedicated, extensive demo. I don't think we necessarily want to do that today, but we want to give everybody the opportunity to find that since there's clearly a lot of interest.
Yeah, right. I mean, if we can organize it, I'll be happy to do a demo if we set up a date session, 1 hour demo or something like that.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get to that. Hey guys, the other question I would have for you is, we've been talking about CICD all these years as if they're one thing, and the reality is most people seem to be further down the CI side of that equation than the CD side of that equation. Do you think as we move along here with Jenkins X that we might make some progress on the CD side as much as we have on the CI side, and how will that change, do you think? Victor, you want to take a shot at that, and then Ethan jump in?
Yeah, so, depends on how you define it. In my head, CI is a subset of CD. Continuous delivery is all about from push to repository until it is ready for production. So in that terms, I don't really see a distinction between the two, except that CD goes further than CI, and it has a very clear defined boundaries. It starts with a commit, ends being ready for production, while CD does not really, you don't know anything is a CI, sorry. Yes, I think that's kind of focus of Jenkins X is to really define what CD even is. I think that there's still a lot of confusion about, everybody knows the basics. CD is when you have production ready release on every commit to the master branch. But then I haven't seen yet enough good examples of from standardization point of view, and that's maybe one of our focuses is to really define what it is from a technical perspective, maybe more than verbal explanation.
Ethan, you agree with that?
I think that's right. I think, for us, the gold star is kind of the concepts described in accelerate. And when you look at tooling like Jenkins X, it's just doing so much more than classic CI/CD tooling, right? You can do all of your CI stuff locally before you push. You can spin up dev pods to work in and debug remotely in Kubernetes pods per commit. You can push to staging environments that create themselves instantly for every commit or PR. You can use feature flags like at CloudBees. We just acquired rollout. We're excited about that. So I think it's getting harder and harder to say this thing is CI and this thing is CD, because it's really just how you work on your software day to day, where release is a long period of time with a lot of security and maturity, and testing is baked into that process as well. And Jenkins X is really, that's why we describe it as opinionated in a workflow tool as much as CICD, because it's everything about how you write the code and what you do while and after you write that code.
Okay. Somebody wants to know, I guess I'm gonna have to paraphrase this, but they want to know, how do they get the sense now that Jenkins X is worth adopting? And, you know, beyond just kind of like, we're having a conversation about the intangibles in many ways, but they want to know, you know, what's the tangible thing on the other side of it that they can count on with Jenkins X that, you know, we're not getting to at the moment because we can't really do that demo, but, you know, maybe you could describe a couple of things for them. Victor, you want to take a shot at that? Sorry, Ethan.
I'll go, and Victor can jump in. I think if you look at some key features, right, staging environments and automatic preview environments and GitOps and ChatOps and things like this we have in there. If you start using Jenkins X today, your devs are going to be more productive day to day for these type of applications. Your code quality will go up because it's easier to test, it's easier to preview, it's easier to share, it's easier to collaborate, it's easier to enforce strict standards around how you work across repos. Those are things you will get value out of immediately with Jenkins X today. And if you want more detail than we're doing here, like I said, we are ears wide open, so anybody is welcome to raise their hand with us, and we're happy to schedule some time to talk to you directly and learn what you're trying to do and see how we can help you.
Victor, you want to add to that?
Spot on. Nothing to add. I agree fully.
All right. There's one other question here. Somebody wants to know what the difference is between Jenkins X and CloudBees cores is. I don't know if everybody knows what CloudBees core is, so maybe you might want to describe that a little bit.
So CloudBees core would be, and Ethan, correct me, you're better at this than I am. CloudBees core would be enterprise version of Jenkins, right? Without X in any form of way, right? At least CloudBees core that is available right now. What's coming is a different story. And Jenkins, as we already discussed, is a mostly, if not completely different solution than Jenkins. At some moment, there will be an enterprise version of it and stuff like that, but for now, simply core is enterprise Jenkins, and Jenkins X is a completely different thing.
I think core is really Jenkins plus a bunch of really rock hard, super stable value on top for enterprises that CloudBees provides to help you support and run it day to day. CloudBees Jenkins X Distribution is our start of doing that for Jenkins X. Jenkins X is a much earlier stage project than Jenkins, so we're not trying to rush that forward. We're not trying to put the cart before the horse. We're trying to build the community and help teams adopt it. But the distribution is trying to do some of what core does for Jenkins, but for Jenkins X.
All right. There's also a deeper dive question here relating to AWS and EKS. They want to know if Jenkins X CLI will install over EKS, and what will be the level of support for Ingress controllers. So, gentlemen, I don't know which one of you can go into a little bit of a deeper dive, if at all. What can you share?
So right now, Jenkins X supports, Jenkins X open source works in almost any Kubernetes you can imagine, and that includes EKS. Now, outside of that, we are now working very hard to make it battle tested for each platform, and that's where Google right now is in the first round of distribution. Then will come EKS. So the answer is yes and no. It definitely works in EKS, but we still have a bit of effort to make it stable and supported. And by supported, I mean commercially supported, as open source that is already available there and everybody can use it.
Yeah, there's things you can do to make it run on EKS today, right? You're welcome to join the Jenkins X channels in the Kubernetes Slack group. We have great community in GitHub and issues. Our target date for commercial support around EKS, again, right now is September, maybe a little earlier or later. GKE on Google happened a lot faster because so much of the Kubernetes world is just naturally on Google. So that was easier to get the community product to evolve. With the distribution, again, this is where we're making a promise to provide enterprise-ready version of Jenkins X, and that's requiring a little bit more direct effort from CloudBees to get the EKS world ready, because the Kubernetes world is still pretty heavily Google, so that's not happening as quickly from the community, but we're doing that ourselves over the next couple months.
All right, and we have another question in here regarding Spinnaker. There's at least one fan of the CDF in here. Can you guys explain what the relationship will be going forward between Jenkins X and Spinnaker? Ethan.
So Spinnaker is a great product. I think the exact relation, if we're being completely honest, I don't think we have it 100% mapped out. There's integrations that we're interested in. I don't think there's 0% chance that the two make sense together. There's a lot of conversations around that. But I think it's actually great that Spinnaker exists. And I personally think it's great that it might even be a little bit confusing, because this is a point where we're trying to figure out what the right way to do interoperability for next-gen software is. And it's great that they're both in the foundation. It's great that we're both open source, because then we can talk to them, work to them. Where do we want teams to be a year from now? And we can figure out that path together. I don't think there's one exact answer yet. I also don't think they're completely exclusive, and I think you'll see us figure that out as we keep working together through the foundation.
All right, guys, I think we're going to close it down here. I want to thank you for spending some time with us. This has been great. I encourage everybody to check out some of the events that are coming on here in terms of the CloudBees conference that's upcoming. And thank you all for sharing some time with us.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everybody.